Hello and welcome to Finding Your Holy Grail, a show produced through Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I would like to thank station manager Jeannie White and CEO Lillian Caldwell. I am your host, Dr. Mandy Simon, and I'm in the studio with my co-creator, Dr. Gordon McMillan.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to our show. Finding Your Holy Grail is all about building skills to live fearlessly in the post-pandemic world. Mandy and I thought it would be really helpful to kick off 2021 by sharing practical guidance on setting goals that you can actually achieve. It's a subject we're really into, and so we've looked into the most effective strategies to help you define and achieve your goals. This is the fourth week in a series of 5 as we devote this first month of the new year to unpacking perceptions of fear, our levels of resilience, and our belief systems. Today, we're focusing on blind spots and how to identify them.
Understanding our blind spots is one of the most crucial areas of our lives that we can improve to truly reach the goals and dreams we set for ourselves. And to illustrate this point, I want to start off by telling you a story. 6 men in a village went to observe an elephant. It was the first time, and all of them were blind. The first man touched the elephant's leg and replied, "It's a pillar." The other said after touching the tail, "No, it's like a rope." The blind men began to argue. Everyone believed that they were right. And after observing the elephant, the rest thought that it was either a snake, a spear, a hand fan, or a branch. A wise man happened to be passing by and calmly explained, "You are all right. Everyone noticed something different because each of you touched a different part. The elephant has all the features that each of you said." Our realities are like the elephant in this Indian parable, and everyone observes parts of it. To get the whole picture, you need to consider other people's perspectives and not just your own. The bits we can't see, the gaps in our understanding, we call these blind spots, and we all have them.
Thanks, Mandy. It's a great story. Blind spots arise when our perception of reality differs from what is actually the truth. Blind spots can either be physical or they can be psychological. Both types lead us to experience events which are unexpected and often painful. Physical blind spots occur when you simply don't see something until it's too late. The open kitchen cabinet door, for example, you bump into when you finish washing the dishes. Ah! Or the dog's ball you trip over when you walk into the living room. Ah!
In truth, there are over 50 factors that influence our ability or inability to recognize our blind spots that is within the context of each situation. Needless to say, the topic is complex and it warrants closer examination. These examples show how blind spots are accidents in the making, and all of these instances result in physical pain to the individuals concerned, whether it's a banged head or a sprained ankle. But it's important to recognize that alongside the physical pains comes the discomfort of knowing that the incident could have been prevented. We could have been more aware, more diligent, less tied up in our own thoughts. This is also the case with psychological blind spots. These occur when we hold a fixed perspective of an issue, and it's so firmly embedded that you can only see that issue from one fixed point of view. Your brain has been convinced that you've figured it out, so you choose to ignore any additional information which might challenge that perspective. I want to give you the most extraordinary example. A friend of mine was being driven to town by her partner at the time, who pulled into a parking space next to the sidewalk. Now, it was a nice, warm June day in America, which means that when she got out of the car, she actually got out on the side, which is the sidewalk, opposed if you were in a place like the UK. However, before getting out of the car, she noticed that there was a fire hydrant. So she mentioned to her partner, "You're parked in front of a fire hydrant." He literally got out of the car, walked around, looked right at the fire hydrant, and said, "There's no fire hydrant here." My friend, when she relayed this story to me, explained that it was just the most inexplicable situation for her. They had just recently started dating, and she really didn't know what to make of the situation, so she left it alone. Long story short, they go out for the afternoon, they enjoy a nice summer day, and they come back, and the car's been towed. This example manifests as a blind spot physically, but in truth, there are some psychological components at play here. And it's impossible to know exactly what's going on in the man's head that prevented him from visually registering the fire hydrant that A, he was told was there and he still could not believe, and B, he looked at and still could not see. This, of course, is a really extreme example. And in cases like this, it's important to understand that this person is trying to exert some level of control over their environment that, due to their own emotional blind spots, has physically manifested into, well, in this case, a pretty expensive towing bill. We won't actually go into the neuropsychology of the brain and personal experiences of this person, but suffice to say that when people are needing to feel in control of their lives, there is a stress response at play, and blind spots can appear in all sorts of ways.
Wow, what a story. It's hard to imagine living life and not being able to have the personal awareness to see a fire hydrant. Let's definitely move on to some other examples that most of us can relate to.
Good plan. The first one I'll offer is when you keep having the same relationship with different people, whether it's a lover, a best friend, or a boss. The point here is that the story ends exactly the same every time. The second example is people consistently describe you in a way that doesn't fit your own self-image. For example, you think you're a good listener, but others would describe you as a person who waits for your turn to talk. You might be a person that overestimates the degree to which others actually agree with you. Or you may underestimate the amount of time it takes you to do certain tasks. A third broad category is you continue to serve people and organizations which no longer serve your own best interests. For example, you continue to stay in a marriage or relationship that is not healthy or loving. Or you continue to believe that you might be promoted at work, even though all the signs are on the wall that you're in a dead-end job and you are not going to be offered that promotion. Or you continue to believe in your own business model for your own venture, but your customers are leaving in drones. The point here is blind spots create lots of problems. What we perceive informs our judgment, and what we don't see affects our behaviors. In these situations, we can develop problematic aspects of our personality that are obvious to everyone but ourselves. These aspects can prevent us from being true and authentic expressions of ourselves. And this distortion is problematic because it prevents us from being as effective as we could be. It also prevents us from being happy or realizing the life that we're pursuing.
So, if you want to achieve your goals in life, it's really important that you understand your blind spots. Until you recognize and overcome them, you will continue to limit your ability to influence others and succeed at the level you desire. Increasing our self-awareness is crucial to seeing the whole picture. Not realizing what you don't know drives confusion, but it's really, really difficult to uncover your blind spots because there is something about human nature that makes it easy to spot a problem in others, but virtually being blind to it in yourself. It's hard to acknowledge that, irrespective of how well you might think you know yourself, the chances are you may be clueless about some of your traits.
This is because blind spots arise when it is often more convenient to remain attached to your own particular perspective of the world than it is to admit, quote, an inconvenient truth of a given situation which may be painful to you. In this respect, blind spots are a reflection of our need for safety because they keep us in our comfort zone and protect us from having to confront our fears.
And as the Russian author Dostoevsky said, lying to ourselves is more deeply ingrained than lying to others. And this is why blind spots are often so difficult to overcome. In the Bible, for example, Matthew tells us it is always easier to see the small piece of sawdust in somebody else's eye than it is to recognize the plank of wood in your own. The great news is that we can overcome our blind spots if we have both the humility and the genuine desire to do so. All we have to do is accept that other people may have a perspective about a certain issue which is in fact more truthful than our own. And then we have to have the humility to admit that we were wrong in the first place.
And I want to qualify by saying what we mean when we say we were wrong. The truth is that within the context of the situation, we were either lying to ourselves or we were simply not seeing the truth. This may seem like a small nuance to most people, but the important aspect here is how we adapt when the new information comes to light. We must be confident enough in our own lives to let go of outdated perspectives if and when the time requires. This is self-awareness. If you truly want to have a greater positive influence and impact in the world around you, each of us must face reality and work on our own shortcomings. It sounds simple, but the reality can be scary. This stems again from our need for safety. Oftentimes, it's helpful to remember and remind ourselves, everyone else except you already knows the truth. If you have nothing to gain from being the only person who is out of step from reality. And this is really an important point. We are actually doing this special goal setting series on understanding the factors that influence your ability to set your goals that you can actually achieve. Because if you don't understand your blind spots, you cannot reach your goals. Therefore, it is worth mentioning the role of fear, your level of resilience, and your belief systems all heavily influence your outcomes. And as we discussed in last week's podcast, belief systems, well, they are the linchpin of the entire setup. And this deserves a little extra attention because in a few situations, it becomes really challenging and you may experience what is known as cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and cognitive dissonance occurs when people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with radical new evidence that challenges their personally held belief, they simply can't accept it. The new evidence is so disruptive, it creates a feeling that is so uncomfortable that they protect their core beliefs. And in these instances, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that does not fit in with what they already believe. For example, you read a newspaper or watch a news report about an event which you believe to be true. Subsequently, new information emerges which reveals a truth so far-fetched according to your currently held belief system that your mind cannot accept the new information as the truth. And there are some very famous examples in which this occurred. These include the Watergate scandal in America, even the Holocaust, the Cuban Missile Crisis, amongst others. The important aspect here is to understand that trusted media outlets delivered the news, which later released additional information that changed the original facts.
Let's bring this one closer to home. Take yourself back to last winter when the lockdowns for the pandemic started in 2020. Ask yourself if you suddenly thought you were living in a science fiction film. The point that we are making is that our perception of reality is based on our own belief systems, our fears, and levels of resilience. But it is also dependent on the environment and the context in which those in power are feeding the information to us. We are actually dependent on this information for testing the reality of our environments. And all of us can think of a time when we knew something at work or something at home was, quote, off, but we could not put our finger on it. It actually required the passage of time to elapse for the, quote, real story, end quote, to come out. Therefore, in understanding your own blind spots, you must test not only your own perceptions of reality, but the accepted reality of your contextual environment at the time.
So let's start and look at where our blind spots actually come from. One of the easiest ways to understand your blind spots is to list the things that control you. Whatever it is, a social, business, financial, or a personal situation. At the end of the day, we all get to choose the reality we want our lives to be. There are many forces and distortions which can pull us off center. And to remain authentic, we have to keep working hard to recognize our blind spots.
So this week, our call to action challenge for you at home is 1, write down 5 words that describe you. 2, ask 9 people to do the same. We suggest you choose 3 family members, 3 coworkers, and 3 friends. 3rd, compare the answers with your own assessment. Note down what are the similarities and what are the differences. 4, write down 3 things in each of the following categories: personal, professional, and financial that actually control you. 5, write down what is the biggest blind spot that is the elephant in your life. You know it's in the room, but you prefer not to confront it or talk about it because it feels unsafe. Please note that in this workbook this week, there are so many resources on finding your blind spots that we have listed additional exercises, plus websites and quotes from very famous people to help you out with these exercises.
And we hope that all of our listeners find this simple exercise to be helpful, and that you're using all of the knowledge we've learned together this month to make sure the goals we wrote down on the 1st of January are the goals we can actually achieve, as opposed to goals we think we can achieve. Be sure to join us next week in the final episode of our goal setting series. But before signing off, Mandy and I wanted to share aspects of cognitive dissonance which we're currently working through. In this post-pandemic world, some of our deeply held beliefs are being challenged by information which is coming from completely different perspective. In my case, for example, I'm starting to question the role of mainstream media and the agendas which might be behind the stories that they cover. In truth, I've always been skeptical, but recent events have made me question things much more deeply. What on earth is going on when they scarcely mention that the governments of 6 countries have collapsed this month? In fact, it happened over one long weekend from the 13th to the 16th of January. To me, it's incredible that the ruling parties of Russia, Holland, Italy, Germany, Estonia, and Kuwait have all toppled since the 12th of January. What's extraordinary is these major global events have scarcely featured in the mainstream news. And the truth is, I had to do some digging to find out what was going on, because most of the mainstream reports were featured for a very limited time only. In one instance, the BBC's coverage of the Russian government's collapse had disappeared from their headlines page within 24 hours of being announced.
Thank you, Gordon. This is an interesting point, and hopefully information that will be more widely shared in the coming days, so each of us can understand what are the factors at play. I only hope at this time that all peoples living in these countries are doing well. And before we go, this brings us to my own example. As a clinical researcher for the past decade and a frontline healthcare provider, my belief system has been seriously challenged when I found out that governments across the planet have removed all consumer protections from the individual that receives the COVID-19 vaccine. There is a lot of research out there that our listeners can do on their own for this subject. But it is my belief system that is challenged that has to do with the legislation that came into existence after World War II. It's called the Nuremberg Code, and it is an international law to protect citizens from being forced by governments to have medical experiments done on them without their knowledge. As a result, humans no longer have experimental medical procedures done without full disclosure and knowledge of the interventions being put into their bodies. In fact, all clinical drug trials approved by the FDA and other protective agencies in the world require pharmaceutical companies and insurance providers and their administrators to pay for harm that is undue in cases when a medical intervention has not gone as expected for a patient receiving these procedures during a clinical trial. As a researcher that has worked on clinical trials myself, I have a certification that required me to read these laws, understand them, pass a test over a curriculum that took me 4 hours, and to uphold these consumer protections for my own patients. This is a very important and serious piece of legislation. In the case of the COVID-19 vaccination, this protection for the consumer has been removed. And when the person receiving the vaccine signs the consent form, they accept all responsibilities of the drug side effects. This is not a judgment on whether to receive the COVID vaccine or not. It is an illustration that if something goes desperately wrong, the person receiving the vaccine has no option to seek damages from the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical manufacturers, or the governments where the individual is a citizen. And this includes if they become too sick to work and support their families, or worse. For me, this is a complicated scenario and one that challenges my own belief systems. This is my own example of cognitive dissonance, and an area that is not a blind spot for me, but creates such a split between the reality of the world we have been living in prior to the pandemic than to the one that we live in now. It brings up all the issues that we've touched on today: my fears, my resilience, my belief systems, my concern for control over what happens to my patients and friends, colleagues, and myself that receive the vaccine. It's a serious consideration, and perhaps an incredibly relevant one, because every year I have received my flu shot, just like the healthcare organization I work for has required. The point of sharing these stories is that information around the world is changing daily. And our ability to recognize our own blind spots is one thing, and how they relate to the context of the environments that we're currently a part of requires great personal awareness and rigor. In such unprecedented times, we encourage you to understand You all have the answers inside of you. Give yourself the grace and opportunity to recognize your own knowing. In all cases, from the first lockdowns, we can see more information and the passage of time is required before the whole story emerges.
Thank you, Mandy. What a sobering perspective. And on that point, we're going to close by thanking Passionate World Talk Radio for providing a platform on their radio internet station for our show, Finding Your Holy Grail. For more information, please go to passionateworldtalkradio.com. To subscribe to our community, go to findingyourholygrail.com and write to us at findingyourholygrail@gmail.com.
Thank you to our listeners at home. Until next week, keep well and stay brave.